Hello and welcome to SecureWorld Behind the Scenes, our exclusive interview series. This is Tom Bechtold, your co-host for today's program. Thank you all for joining us. Today, Bruce Sussman from the SecureWorld media team will be talking with Dale Zabriskie from Proofpoint Security Awareness, formerly known as Wombat Security Awareness Training. And we'll be taking a look at the annual Beyond the Phish Report. Before we get going, though, I want to give you a brief introduction to our guests. Dale has over 25 years in cybersecurity, information technology, research and development, and regulatory compliance. He consults with companies across the globe, advising on the implementation of effective security awareness strategies to change end-user behavior and reduce organizational risk. Known for his ability to relate both technically and conceptually in an authoritative yet entertaining style, Dale is a popular speaker and panelist, having made presentations on security awareness in over 50 countries. And my co-host, Bruce Sussman, Director of Content at SecureWorld and host of our brand new SecureWorld Sessions, our cybersecurity podcast. Bruce, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Tom, for that introduction, and thank you, Dale. Appreciate your time today. And, we are talking about going behind the scenes on the 2019 Beyond the Phish Report, which is a highly anticipated mid-year report that you issue at Proofpoint. And Dale, I thought a good place to start would be, the title of the research is Beyond the Phish. And I've heard this question asked. I've heard you answer it, but will you explain for our audience, why not just do simulated phishing attacks? That's where the threats are coming from. Why do we have to go beyond that?
Well, thank you, Bruce, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And that's a question that gets brought up all the time, so I appreciate that. And the reason that we focus and we call it Beyond the Phish is really encapsulated in one of the first pieces of statistics from that report. And it's a matter that, on average, we see that in our platform and of our customers around the globe, that about 9% is the failure rate on simulated phishing attacks. It's where people are getting in their testing. And you think, okay, that's, if I have 1,000 people in my organization, that's 90 people that are clicking. And so you can do that math, and that you may think, well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm in single digits. We're doing pretty good. But then you look at the other side of when you look at your user base and you start to find out what they really know and what they can tell you as opposed to what they click on, things have changed dramatically. And the average percentage of questions that are answered incorrectly when you look at an assessment around things like, how well do you know password policy? How well do you understand protecting proprietary information or personally identifiable information? How well do you engage how well do you understand how to engage in social media in a secure fashion and other topics? When you look at that percentage, 25% of the questions are answered incorrectly. So 75% is barely a passing grade, I think, in most places. And really to change the needle and to change behavior within an organization, it's much more than just users clicking. It's what do they know and how well are they prepared to protect themselves? Because in this game that we're playing, we're only going to succeed when the users become part of the solution rather than we think of them as a problem, and if they just stop clicking. So there's a lot more beyond the phishing simulation. And for a lot of companies, that's where they start, and rightly, that's fine and that's good because it's easy to do. It's easy to create something and throw it out there and see how your people react to it. But it's foundational. It's only foundational because it needs to lead you by assessments and understanding what your users know and what they don't know. That's going to lead you to not only how do I train them if I need to do training, but if I'm going to continue to do phishing simulations, what should I do those on? When I uncover what my people know and I understand where the knowledge gaps are, it helps direct the phishing simulations to be more targeted as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a great perspective. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is, that, phishing simulations, they give you part of the picture, but you don't really know what's going on with the rest of the picture until you start to, uncover things and create that loop of, looking at the holistic problem. Is that right?
It's absolutely true, and any practitioner in this space are going to tell you that, they get frustrated. These people, why do they keep clicking on these things? And that's where the focus gets, and we get all wrapped up in click rates, and we do a phishing campaign, a simulation campaign, and we get a number, and then a month later or whatever, or 6 weeks later, we do another one, and it goes up, and everybody freaks out, and what's it going? What are they doing? And if you don't really have that perspective of the knowledge base of your users, you're going to be forever chasing a number and being drawn or driven by this number, which is not the total picture. And just one little thing about click rates, they're going to change from campaign to campaign. They're going to move depending on what group you're targeting, what time of year it is, what country you're in, what region you're in, what is the template that you're using. What are you trying to get them on? What are you testing them on? There's all sorts of variables, and click rate's going to go up and down and change all the time. And again, it's just that one view, and it becomes very myopic for organizations, and it becomes reactionary as opposed to properly responding. I'm a big fan of responding as opposed to reacting to things. Responding, connotes that I'm thoughtful and I'm measured and I'm basing it off some data or some information. That's what we need to do, and that's what this report really uncovers, is kind of a, we call it Beyond the Phish. It's behind the scenes. It's pulling the sheets back and seeing exactly what's happening within the organization is very, very eye-opening for companies.
Yeah, no doubt. I have read the report myself. It is fantastic, and I know why it's so popular with security leaders, because it's so rich in information. And I want to move on to another area, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, that you don't want to be reacting to things. You want to be responsive, and there's a difference. And one of the things that happens is I think security leaders feel like, the threat landscape, it's constantly evolving. So they're wondering, how can I educate or make sure that my end users are aware of the ways they are being attacked? What kind of suggestions do you have for that kind of question?
Well, one of the things that we do at Proofpoint to help answer that question is we connect and we integrate the training platform and the phishing simulation platform with the threat intelligence that an organization has. Every mature organization is monitoring and tracking the things that are coming into their firewall through their email systems. They're aware, or should be certainly, and most of them are. They do a really good job at understanding the kind of threats that are hitting their own environment. And that is one of the reasons that Proofpoint really separates itself, is because now by integrating that data with the training and simulation platform, we're able to use, for example, let's say that an organization is getting hit with a barrage of credential compromise type phishing attempts, and they've captured those. And they look at them and they analyze them. The platform allows you to repurpose that very thing and use that as a simulation. Because often a lot of those emails, they don't get to the end user. We were just with a customer this morning that on a 30-day basis sees, I think it was somewhere around 30 million emails that came into their environment, but out of those 30 million emails, only about 3 million of them actually get delivered to an inbox because of the process of protection and an email gateway and those technical things that go on that really help protect an organization. So there's all sorts of things that the end user's never going to see. But the organization can find those, use those, and realize that, wow, this bad actor out here is really hitting us with something. They're trying to go after these people with this threat. Let's use that and see how well our people can respond to that. What do they know about that type of threat? So in the platform at Proofpoint, you can take that, repurpose that email, create a phishing simulation campaign out of it, blast it to your folks, and see how they respond and how they react to it. Now, what am I getting? Well, I'm getting some really hard data about how my users would have reacted should that malicious email had actually made it to their inbox. So it's very relevant information as opposed to what a lot of organizations start with is just a general, here's a register, or take this survey for a free iPhone or something like that, which does, a lot of people, you'd be surprised how many people will click on that. But to really help change behavior of an organization, you want to do things that are relevant and present and really refer to the things that are attacking your specific organization. And that's one thing that Proofpoint does that really, really helps. So that's just one idea about how to use actual in-the-wild events and emails as a training and simulation example.
Yeah, that is fantastic. But of course, Dale, the first thing that comes to mind is, have you seen the price of iPhones lately?
Yeah,
no wonder people want to click, right?
Exactly. And it's all emotional. We are emotional creatures, all of us. And even in InfoSec, we want to bring it down to the bits and the bytes and the ones and the zeros and be very technical. And in InfoSec, we look at some threat that comes through, and we look at somebody clicking on the free iPhone email, and we think, what in the world are they thinking? How in the world? But we have to stop and realize that the emotion is what's played on, and that emotion is either a negative thing, your visa just got charged, or these things that are out there that show create this negative reactionary, oh my gosh, I got to take care of this, all the way to the happy side where I could win something for free, or the latest cat video brings this emotion to us. And so, it's interesting to see this mix of these things that are very sophisticated, but then the very simple things are thrown out there that get some wrong response from people, but it's still all tied to emotion. And so we have to, and that goes back to my point about responding versus reacting, right? If we're a little thoughtful, we're going to do better. Which just bring up, one of the statistics from our State of the Phish report, which came out earlier this year, shows that the older users, the older workers, the adults, the baby boomers, understand phishing better than the younger workers, and that's kind of eye-opening to a lot of people, because a lot of people think, well, the younger folks, they grew up with technology, they're familiar, they've always had a device, it's just second nature. But it turns out that the more mature workers are more thoughtful. They're a little more experienced, right? And they respond versus react, as opposed to, hey, yeah, I see that. I always, I'm texting with my friends, I'm emailing with my friends. It's just this mode that we get into, that the younger folks are just so used to it that they tend to not think quite as much and perhaps maybe respond a little more emotionally. So, we need to help our users understand that and teach them how to respond, right, properly.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. That's great. That's great. Thank you for that insight. Now, moving on to another question that I had, I wanted to ask you about training modules and trying to determine which ones to deploy to end users. As you're in and out of these organizations, you're working with them and partnering with them on security awareness. Is there a one-size-fits-all campaign that they can deploy, or what do you recommend?
Well, I think that there are some general things around basic topics that that any organization would be very happy to train their users on, passwords and social media and protecting data. Most organizations have some compliance that they have to, some regulation they have to comply with. So there might be something like a GDPR training or things that are regulatory in nature. there are some foundational things that work really, really well. And especially for an organization, as I talk to some that say, we do phishing simulations, but we can't do training. Our company won't let us do training. And so, okay, understand. And I think where we're stuck now a little bit is that we look at cybersecurity training and security awareness training. It tends to be thrown in the same bucket as insider training and harassment training and the annual things that have to be done to tick a box, that it gets packaged with the whole idea of training. And what we're trying to do at Proofpoint is to help people move the needle by saying, all right, you have basic things that you want to train on, and doing something is better than nothing. There's no question about it. But to really decide, what do I need to train my people on? The best way is the three-legged stool of phishing simulation and awareness, or assessments, assessment modules, so find out what my people know and what they don't know. And then that third leg is the training. And the training gets driven, modified, and structured based on what the organization learns from the phishing simulations and the assessments. That's the best way to do things, because now I've got a holistic view and a comprehensive approach, and I can go to my stakeholders and say, I need to do, we have found out, for example, that our people don't understand the password policy, or we've just implemented a new password policy. We did an assessment, and we had a bad result. We had a much worse result than we wanted. We need to do training around this. That helps an organization make the decision and get the buy-in, get the budget to do those kind of things much better than saying, well, we have to train people. Well, what are you going to train them on? Well, we have to train them about to be secure. When you talk in more general terms, it's harder to get the stakeholders to be really engaged. But when you use metrics and you use data that's from your own organization, that's when the buy-in can go a lot farther. One of the companies I was dealing with and talking with recently, they don't have any. We're talking with them, trying to help them. They don't have any phishing simulation, but what they are seeing is their click rate on malicious and spam and things that they shouldn't be clicking on is almost 60%. They're up around 60%. And that's huge. And they know that, and they're trying to change that. But we want to see, the best way to get people is not, like we talked about earlier, don't just focus on the click rates, but know what your people have, and that's going to allow you to determine how to train, and what to train on. So the short answer is you're going to have requirements, you're going to have compliance things and regulatory issues that are going to drive a lot of those decisions. It's always good to have some basic modules that you're going to train on and know, to determine what to help your people grow. But the best thing happens when you're doing it from a very targeted and metric-based approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And most security leaders and teams I like value metrics and data, so I can see how that would also work going right up the food chain from there. Now, I also want to ask you, Dale, about the 2019 Beyond the Phish Report. As you look at that data and as you've sifted through it and been talking about it, are there particular categories you would recommend people focus on based on what came out of this year's report?
Well, I think when you do look at things, you have to look at it through the lens of your organization. I keep coming back to that, but you have to first of all understand that this data is from almost 130 million questions in our platform that people have gone through in their understanding of cybersecurity topics. So it's extremely comprehensive. It's statistically significant, right? One of the things, and I think I'd answer it this way, one of the things that we introduced this year was helping, from a module perspective, is helping organizations determine the insider threat vector, both intentional and unintentional. So there's a malicious insider that might be doing something, but there's also the unintentional insider, and that's where we've seen a lot of movement and change and a lot of threats happening. And then the second module was helping executives understand the need for cybersecurity, because often executives are exempt for all the right reasons, but they're also extremely vulnerable for all the obvious reasons. So being able to talk to them and to help them understand what needs to be done is important. I think, though, that the biggest thing that really jumped out at me was the results of the organizations that are using our managed services platform. And I don't say that to put a shameless plug out for managed services. What I really am trying to point out is that as a customer of Proofpoint, if they engage with managed services and we can help them set things up and run it, they're going to operate on what we call our continuous training methodology. And that's where all the things are organized and structured based on this methodology. And what's interesting is the outcome of that is that across the board, the results of organizations that are using managed services, that are using the methodology and are really comprehensively doing phishing simulations and risk assessments, knowledge assessments, and training, across the board, their results are 20 to 40% better than other organizations who aren't using that methodology. Some of the big differences are around, understanding physical security risks, working safely outside the office, protecting mobile devices. We live our lives very differently on a mobile device than we do on a laptop or a desktop. We just are different in how we approach it. Everybody is. And so these topics are important. And when you look at the results, there's a marked difference between the organizations that have a structured approach to education and security awareness as opposed to those that are just trying to do phishing simulations as an example. And I think that, it kind of, what it does for organizations is it helps answer the question why we're doing all this. It's how and the what, we get into that. But when you really have a structured plan and you're doing things based on a methodology, the results happen. They're just remarkably different. And unfortunately, there's still an attitude out there that awareness equals education. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations are doing posters and videos and emails and lunch and learns and executive talks and all these different things, and that is good, and that is right. But it doesn't mean that your people understand everything. And that the awareness approach of the videos and just having a culture out there of things that are visual and that people are seeing, and it's not just behind the scenes doing phishing simulation, is important, but it's reinforcing. It's designed to reinforce what your program is doing. So the more structured you can be and work with a methodology that touches on these ideas of assessment and education and reinforcement and then measuring all that goes on, that's when you really, really can start to see the difference, move the numbers, and go to your stakeholders and say, hey, these are the results that we're having, and continue to develop and mature the program.
Great insights. Thank you, Dale. That's excellent and a really great overview there. I am curious, since we're going behind the scenes here, what was it that originally spurred the Beyond the Phish Report? I mean, how did this whole thing get going?
Well, you know, the State of the Phish Report's been around for a number of years, and when you look at the data in there, you see a lot of really interesting metrics, and most organizations will look at that and go, wow, I see myself there. But what's happened over the last few years here, maybe the last 5 years, that's become so obvious in this world of cybersecurity is that the bad guys have realized, and this is more than 5 years, but I think the response that organizations are making has been changing over the last 5. But ultimately, these threats that are hitting environments, 99% of them require human intervention. They require somebody to click on something. You know, you go back to the Melissa virus or the I Love You worm, you know, you had to do something. And when you did it, it was, you know, Katie bar the door and all hell breaks loose when these big, very disruptive threats that have happened over the last 20 years, you kind of milestone things. And so what the industry has done is they've taken over that last 20 years this approach of, so I've gone, if you haven't noticed, I've gone from 5 to 10 to 20 now, I keep going back. But what the industry's done is reacted by of technical controls and operational controls. And we've developed and enhanced, you know, firewalls and endpoints and gateways and all these different things to thwart these onslaughts. But ultimately, and if this is the 5-year thing where organizations are realizing that it's people that are, and I don't mean to say that people are causing the problem. What I'm saying is that the people are being targeted very, very specifically. When you look at some of the business email compromise things of, hey, Bob, you know, this is the CFO, I'm talking to the CEO, I need you to wire this money, or vice versa, whatever it is, where people are speaking the language of the person that they're targeting because they've done all this research and they know from all the data they can find online who they are and where they work and their things that they like and their family and their dog and all this stuff. They start to get very, very targeted in the crafting of a threat for a very specific purpose that requires an emotional engagement. And so this has been the big shift of understanding, okay, we've done all these technical things. You know, the iterative changes in technology are tiny and a little bit here and a little bit there. But now the big change we can have is help the users, instead of thinking of them as a problem, thinking of them as a part of the solution. And so now we need to look at that. Well, what do they really know? What are they doing? You know, what are their knowledge gaps? Because that's what's being targeted by the bad guys. That's where they're going. So we need to understand that and beat them there, basically. And, you know, I would say that a good measure of any organization is not. Let me restate that. You know, I talk to folks a long time and say, well, why are you doing phishing simulations? Tell me. And they look at me kind of funny, like, well, what do you mean, why am I doing? No, really, what's your purpose in doing this? And often you'll hear something from at least one person in the organization where they say, well, we're trying to trick people. Or we're trying to get them, right? We're going to get them now, you know. And my point is that is the exact wrong reason to run a program. You know, and the other question is, well, okay, why do you educate? Why do you do training? And it's like, well, we have to make them smart enough. And my response to that is, well, no, really not. I mean, a good metric of a healthy organization is if your users will report something that they feel is malicious, because that shows that they're educated to spot things and to think and to respond, not react. And they bring it to light. They share it with the InfoSec team. The InfoSec team says, wow, this got through. Thank you. This is opening our eyes to what's going on. And now we can enable that type of behavior and even reward that type of behavior. But that's the win-win for the entire organization. And so Beyond the Phish is really understanding, what do you know? And in what industry are these things happening? And where do people need the most help, or where are they the best at? Because that is, as I said, going to answer all the questions that we need. So I think it's part of the evolution that we've gone through in the way threats have evolved, the way InfoSec has responded to those threats, and now we're really having to focus on the people and the users to bring them into the fold instead of I'll just wrap up with this. The InfoSec team thinks of the users as carbon-based life form units, and the users think the InfoSec team is the Department of No. And that's not a healthy relationship, right? That's an adversarial relationship. And because it's people-focused, the organization has to adopt that as well, because the threats are people-focused. If the organization will adopt that same approach, now we're going to be, safer, better off. We're going to reduce the exposure of the organization, and that's what Beyond the Phish is trying to shed some light on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for that background. And, when you said that about the carbon-based life forms versus the InfoSec team of No, it kind of reminded me of an interview I did with a CISO, I think it was SecureWorld Detroit, where he said, he had a stop list, the things that CISOs can stop doing now. And one, he said, was stop being curmudgeons. That's something security can stop doing. So it goes right along those lines. That's great. One thing you touched on, and this will be my final question, but it's always kind of, I don't know if it's fun to look at this, but it's certainly eye-opening. You mentioned, one of the points of the report is to see who's doing the best and who's doing the worst. From an industry perspective, who is doing the worst right now? What does that look like?
Well, not to name names, but that's interesting that you bring that up, because it depends. The answer is it depends. There's no so much one way, although when you look at it as comprehensively as you can, what we see is that the groups that are getting the wrong answers, the most wrong answers basically, happen to be in education, that's higher education, transportation, energy, healthcare, manufacturing. Those are in the 23 to 25% that we talked about earlier of wrong answers. Now that's a very general statement, okay? Because if you go a little farther and deeper, that's where you can start to understand really what goes on. So the report, if you look at the report, it's broken down by industry, but it's also broken down by departments, which brings an interesting spin on it. But what I want to focus on is that every topic, for example, avoiding ransomware or compliance or phishing threats or passwords, each one of those topics has a best and a worst. And that can greatly vary depending on the industry. For example, the ransomware, avoiding ransomware attacks, the insurance organizations industry did the best. They had an 8% failure rate. Whereas the defense industrial base, so the defense stuff and all the organizations that support the Department of Defense, this is not just the federal Department of Defense, it includes all the other companies in the private sector that support that, they were the worst at 22%. And when you look at those numbers, you see some things that really vary depending on the topic, which goes against, again, to my point, that if you really understand what's happening in your space, you can start to address it. One other number, the defense industrial base was the best at protecting data through its life cycle. And that makes sense because the defense industrial base is going to be structured to where they have specific policies around data life cycle, whereas some organizations don't have those policies in place. So defense industrial base was the best. The best was 16%, and so what's that? 84% were correct. And the worst performing industry in protecting data through its life cycle was the energy sector, which had a score of 70%. So they failed 30% of the time. And so when you look at it that way, you start to understand that you can't just pick one industry and say, you guys are the worst. You have to drill down and understand, well, what are we talking about? And what does my organization, if I'm in the energy sector, and I find that if I do an assessment, I find my people need to understand the life cycle of data better. Well, let's do some training on that. So that's what the data really shows in Beyond the Phish, is that, yeah, we don't want to have a poster child of being the worst or what have you, but look at it by topic and really understand what do we need as an organization to help our people, as I said earlier, better protect themselves.
Well, secretly, I was hoping for a poster child, but I see exactly what you're saying, Dale. That we don't, goes back to the notion of just having a holistic approach, like you were talking about, and knowing what the research says, not only on a big picture report like this, but also some of the details that you offer in the report by sector, because that can really help inform what you do. So thank you so much for taking some time with us today and for sharing your insights. As always, really appreciate it. And of course, in the show notes, I will be linking to the 2019 Beyond the Phish Report, so you can download that for yourself and kind of check things out organizationally and industry vertical and things like that, where your industry stands. So with that, thank you, Dale, and I will turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Dale. Great content, you guys. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. We hope everybody learned a little something out of today's interview, certainly with Cybersecurity Awareness Month coming up. Certainly take a look at that report if you haven't already. Some great information in there. Be on the lookout for future behind-the-scenes interviews and our new podcast series with our own Bruce Sussman. On behalf of the SecureWorld Digital team, I want to thank you all again for your time and participation. This concludes our broadcast.